Hi, this is Mr. Gideon. I want to talk now about how we predict changes that take place in economics. Predicting changes that will happen to curves, specifically which way will they shift and have to be redrawn, and how that affects prices and quantities. But we have to start with a bit of information about how to graph, because that's going to be a crucial tool for you to use throughout this class. We're still in the microeconomic phase, and that's what we're focusing on. Very quickly, we're going to move on from that, and we're going to do macroeconomic viewpoints for the rest of the semester. That'll involve much more complex ways of graphing, but we start now with a cleaner, simpler perspective using the tool of graphing, and then we build toward the macroeconomic level later. But when we're talking in economics about making predictions, graphs become a very important tool for illustrating what we think is going to happen. If variable A changes, how would it look and how would it influence the world if it led to a change in B, ceteris paribus. So first of all, what you want to do is grab your stylus and follow along at some point, either now or later, because this is also going to be a method that you're going to use in certain situations this semester to submit written assignments that involve graphs. If you haven't done this before, you do want to be in Word, because that's what I'm going to expect you to use as your canvas, if you will, to draw graphs and then to submit your assignments later. You're going to go then to Review at the top of your page, and then all the way to the right you'll see a button that says Start Inking. When you go to Start Inking, let's start with ballpoint pen and ink in black. Now, before, what we've done is take a look at a host of different market graphs that involve supply and demand. Let's go ahead and stick with the market for coffee, and as I've said before, you want to label at the top, so we'll just put market for coffee at the top. You're going to draw your two axes, and then this axis over to the left will always be labeled price, although sometimes we'll want to be more specific than price. I planted the seed with our last lesson at the very end when I said sometimes when you're going to be more specific, you use a more specific label. In that case, it was interest rate, because that's the kind of price that gets charged on loans. Down here, we'll label it quantity. And the basic starting point is that you have two curves, one that slopes upward and to the right, that represents supply, and we'll do an abbreviation that says S sub 1 for that, and then the curve that shows an indirect relationship between price and quantity, of course, is demand. We'll label that D sub 1. And you need to be in the habit of using abbreviations when you do your graphs, because as changes take place and you have to relabel things, you have to add labels, it becomes very cluttered very quickly if you don't do that. So we want to be in the habit of using abbreviations, and then off to the right or down below having a legend where you define what these symbols mean, even though when you take the AP exam and you use these symbols, invariably the graders are going to know. We just want to be clear that we can prove to other people that we know what we're talking about. And that's one of the ways that this class is very similar to a math class. In a math class, you might be able to come up with the answer, but if you can't show your thinking or prove to the person that's grading your math test all the steps that went into that answer, you might not get full credit. It's the same thing for this class. Let's continue, and let's put an equilibrium point in the middle, and this dot will correspond with a dotted line down to the quantity axis that shows an equilibrium point of Q sub 1, and then a dotted line along the left hand side corresponds to an equilibrium price sub 1, where the two sides are meeting. So as I said before, off to the right or down below, you want to define these abbreviations. So P sub 1 would be starting, starting or initial equilibrium price. Q sub 1 would be starting or initial equilibrium quantity. S sub 1 and D sub 1 would be the same thing. starting or initial supply, starting or initial demand. So go ahead and fill those in. Now, what's going to happen many times in this class, whether it's for a market or for an economy overall, is you're going to be given a scenario. It'll say, assume we're in the market for coffee, or assume we're looking at the Swedish economy. That'll have its own graph. We're at a certain starting point, and then something changes. So let's say in this example, the market for coffee, that the number of sellers of coffee increase in the coffee market. As it says here on this page, you have a little short checklist that you want to ask yourself and take yourself through to determine what's going to happen as a result of that factor. Number 1 says, ask yourself which curve, or curves, because sometimes more than one curve is affected, moves which way. So obviously if the number of sellers increases in the coffee market, then the supply of coffee is going to increase. And that means the curve is going to shift to the right. So we would draw S sub 2 somewhere to the right. And now of course we have a new equilibrium point. So we'll mark that along with the new equilibrium price, which we'll label P sub 2, and the new equilibrium quantity, which we'll label Q sub 2. I want you to also be in the habit of leaving no doubt that you know what the order of movement is using arrows. So we show also using arrows that supply shifted to the right, another arrow there to show that price decreased, and a third arrow there to show that quantity increased. And then of course you want to add these new labels to your legend off to the right or down below. So we're going to need to write S sub 2 as the new or current supply, as well as D sub 2 as the new or current demand. And of course, you guessed it, you have to add P sub 2 and Q sub 2. So all of that stuff needs to be added to your legend. But the most important thing is, after you've asked yourself which curve is going to move which way, and then you moved it by drawing that effect, read your new graph and answer the question. If the number of suppliers increases in the coffee market, what's going to happen to the price of coffee? It's going to decrease. What's going to happen to the quantity, the amount of coffee in the coffee market? It's going to increase. Now, as you can guess, there's all kinds of markets, all kinds of factors and situations that could change, but as long as you stick with this brief checklist, ask yourself first, which curve moves which way, move it, actually draw the change, and then read your new graph, you'll be in good shape. You want to practice as much as possible drawing these graphs because it's going to become a way of life, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. Now, what we're going to do to finish this lesson up, is go to the very end of this page where it says play ball and click on that link, because at that link is a source of practice for you. You're going to want to hit control and then click on the link, and this is an activity that I play sometimes in class. It's called economics, supply and demand baseball, but of course we don't have a physical class to do it, so just go ahead and click through using this arrow on the instructions, and you can see how they set up the game, but you're not going to play the game the way that it would normally be played in class. We're not going to divide the class in half. We're not going to have team captains and all that stuff. The important thing is once you get past all these instructions, to use this as a way to practice and ask yourself in different markets, what would happen to price and quantity? The cool thing about this graph is it's interactive. You can take the supply curve rather than drawing it, grab it, and slide it to the right, and then just take a look at your change here. You could do the same thing after resetting with demand. You can drag it to the right, drag it to the left, and then just read it. So in a very short, quick fashion, you can use this interactive graph as a way to practice certain situations and scenarios and ask yourself, alright, so which curve is going to move, which way? Once I do that, what happens to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? Let's do a couple here, and then I'm going to expect you to do the whole thing on your own, and you want to make sure that you do the entire thing and look at the explanations, because a couple of these questions could actually appear verbatim on a future quiz and or test. What about number 1? What happens to the market for baseball tickets if the town population doubles? Well, ask yourself, which curve is going to change? I think it's probably most reasonable to say the demand curve. The demanders are what are changing here. The demand curve is going to be changing. So if the town population doubles, where people buy tickets for games, I would say it's safe to assume that the demand curve would shift to the right. So go ahead and grab that demand curve, pull it to the right, and then answer the question, what happens to price and quantity? According to my graph, whether I use this or I were to go back and draw a graph the way that I just instructed you and drew a new demand curve to the right from where we originally began, we would have an increase in price and an increase in quantity. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Let's check. Yay, we're right. Price would increase and the quantity would increase. Now that was just a warm-up example for the activity. Now the explanations will be quicker and to the point. Let's do a different market. What happens to the market for wool when the new fall fashions emphasize a return to woolen fabrics? So we're talking about fashion or consumer preferences. That was one of the factors that changed demand. So of course the demand curve is going to shift. Which way is it going to shift? Right or left? Yes, to the right, because we're going to have an increase in the demand in this market for wool. So what happens, of course, to price and quantity? Price increases, quantity increases, I believe. Let's check the answer. Very good. And there's part of the explanation. Preferences are mentioned. Let's do one more. What happens in the market for U.S. produced trucks when Canada, the largest importer of U.S. products, experiences a significant increase in household incomes? So we're saying Canada, which loves to buy our trucks, has an increase in their income. Which curve is going to be affected? Is Canada the supplier of these trucks, or are they demanders of these trucks? Well, they're demanders. They're buyers of these trucks because they're importing from us. We're exporting to them. So once again, demand is going to shift. Which way? To the right. And we'll have the same phenomenon. An increase in price and an increase in quantity as we had in the previous question. But of course, as you know, it's not always going to be demand shifting right. It could be shifting left. You could have supply shifting right, supply shifting left. You could have both curves shifting, which could really be crazy. But if you can't tell exactly what's going to happen with price or quantity when both curves shift, because maybe there's two factors changing simultaneously in one of these questions, then that factor, price or quantity, could be indeterminate. Might be impossible to determine whether it's going to increase or decrease. Let me show you an example. Let's say it's some market where supply decreases and demand increases. Well, right now, if I stopped, it would look like the price is lower and the quantity greater than where we started. But that's because supply moved more than demand. What if demand keeps moving and it ends up moving more than supply? Watch the price. Price is now going back to its original starting place. Oh, and now price actually rose because the increase in demand was greater than the increase in supply. In that case, we would say that the change in price is indeterminate because we don't know how much demand is going to move unless we've been told. If we've been told specifically in the question that demand is going to increase more than supply is going to increase, then we can figure out the answer. But if they just say here's two factors that change in the world, figure out what happens to price and quantity, and they don't tell us which impact is greater, then we have to say indeterminate. Now, you wouldn't say indeterminate on the quantity continuum, right? Because no matter whether demand moves a little bit, watch this, if we go back to the beginning, demand moves a little bit or a lot, quantity is still increasing from our original position. So you could still say that quantity increases, but you don't know what happens with price. If we reset and show it in the reverse order, say supply moves to the left a little bit and demand moves to the left as well, we don't know what's going to happen with price because it depends on which one moves further. But we can say for sure that quantity is going to decrease. There's two other possibilities, of course, right? Let's say supply goes to the left and demand goes to the right. Well, we can say for sure that price is going to increase, no matter what. But depending on how far demand moves, or which curve moves further, all right, that's going to determine how much of a change in which direction we're going to have for quantity. So now we would have to say quantity is indeterminate. Quantity is indeterminate. So hopefully this is a useful tool. Go through all the answers, and then at that point you'll be ready for some practice quiz, real quiz, and a test on Unit 1.